Hi everybody, welcome to Adobe Live. It's Tuesday morning. I'm here with Jeremy Lord. How are you, Jeremy?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm really good. It's good to see you again. We were going to go live last week. That was Wednesday morning our time, which was Tuesday in the US. Of course, last week we were doing Blackout Tuesday across all of Behance, which was something we were very happy to participate in and show our solidarity. And so we decided we would reschedule this live stream, which is part 4 of getting started with illustration. So by now it should be like you've gotten started with illustration because we've already done 3. So yeah, this is the last one in the series, which is a bit bittersweet. But it's been great, and we hope you've been learning with us. Hey to everybody in the chat. I've got the crew here: Festus, RB, Tunk, and D. It's so great to see you all. My dear studio as well. Super cool to have you here. We actually have a Discord now, which is really exciting. So if you're watching this live, we've just thrown in the Discord link in chat. I think most of you that I shouted out just then are in there already. Jeremy just joined this morning, so yeah, we're on a recruitment drive for the Discord to beef it up. So if you want to hang out with us outside of the live streams, that's where we're going to go. And of course, we'll invite all of the streamers like from our regions. Like Jeff Chen does a lot of streaming, and a lot of other people are doing streaming these days. So we'll start building that community. We'll be sharing tips and tricks and giving advice, whether it's career advice or advice on the apps or just a place to kind of hang out and share stuff. That's what it is intended to be. But yeah, so I thought maybe, Jeremy, we'll do a bit of a recap because it's been over a month now since we sort of started. So it might be worth doing a bit of a recap. And you have like kind of I mean, you don't have to show it now, but you have like a bit of a pre-prepared like Behance thing with kind of what we did.
I do, yeah.
Do we have time to jump into that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's do
So
that.
series of 4. So I basically kind of structured this in the sense of like the actual workflow of an illustration with maybe a few kind of like tangents here and there, just to kind of have a look at different styles. We didn't, that's one of the things that we probably didn't touch upon too much. It was more kind of like technical stuff, which is the whole point of this. But we started with very, very basic, which is got a scanned sketch. So a sketch that you've done, old school way with real pencil made of real atoms and everything in the real world. And sort of scanning that in, how to rectify the image a little bit, adjust it so that it's, looking quite sort of good enough that you could use the actual sketch all by itself or just as a base to do a digital drawing on top of it. So we looked at that and sort of creating brushes. Then we moved on to a little bit more color, and we looked at selections and applying color and playing with HueSat and all these kind of different settings that you can do. We looked at selections a lot and layer masks as well. And then we kind of went on a little bit of a kind of stylistic tangent from sort of hardcore digital pen to more kind of photo compositing and using analog assets with watercolor to create an image from those kind of different assets. So piecing together, which is the kind of the genesis of Photoshop, if you will, is just kind of grabbing a whole bunch of different photo images and kind of like smashing them together in an interesting way. And so today what I thought we would do is kind of do a little bit of a recap of that, all the while kind of creating a new illustration. And so this is going to be very much the kind of stuff that I would do personally when I'm working. Where some of these ones, these are all stuff that illustrations that I have done, but this is me in a past life kind of thing. This is me before neon and cyberpunk and everything was the thing that I decided to do. So today we're going to look at that, but we're going to kind of, as we go through, we'll talk about like, this is the thing that we recap then. So it'll be a little bit of a recap as we go kind of process. And what we'll do is we will look at this little scanned illustration and also this little photographed illustration and how we can kind of rectify. They're the same illustration, just one's been kind of worked on a little bit more than the other one. So we can take a look at how to get that properly into a digital format, and then we can start to see if we can use it as is, or if we're going to have to paint over it and add color. And yeah, that'll be kind of the gist of today.
Awesome. Well, very exciting. And so, as always, feel free to ask questions as we go. We're here for a little bit under 2 hours. There's some questions about your surfboard in the background. Tunk thought it was an ironing board at first, and someone else was saying, "Does it look like a gun?" I don't see the gun part of it. It's just a surfboard in a sock, really, right? What do you call that surfboard?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge surfer. I'm not like I love surfing, but I'm not super down with the terminology. I think a gun refers to a smaller board, as in like not a long board,
Right.
and so it is absolutely a gun in that sense. It's actually a bit of a hybrid fish kind of gun. But yeah, I haven't actually touched that in a little while, so definitely gonna get back to it. Although, in saying that, just as I was kind of thinking of getting back in the water, we've had a shark attack on the east coast here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of not too far from Sydney, but yeah, still that always kind of gives you a bit of pause to go back in the water. But anyways,
Yeah.
So let's get stuck in. I
Nice.
think, and as you said, Flynn, like please, like ask me a million questions while I'm doing this. It's the one thing that I can multitask on is talk and draw at the same time. So keep the questions coming, and I think we will break for questions as well, as we normally do.
Yeah, we will. So for those of you watching, Q&A is in 50 minutes. But feel free to ask questions as we're going along. But if there are any kind of bigger questions, we'll take a pause and have a 5 or 10 minute kind of chat in the middle. And if you're watching and you haven't caught any of the previous episodes, you're going to hear us Jeremy will probably refer to, hey, we showed this bit of this technique in one of the previous episodes. All the links are in Behance, just down the bottom. They go straight to YouTube, to each individual session. And if you're watching on YouTube, they're obviously down in the comments below. So feel free to jump around. It's on about 8 hours of illustration from beginner to pro, pretty much. So feel free to navigate around, check it out.
Yeah. So we'll move pretty fast through these. Obviously, I won't go as in depth as I did before because we don't have 8 hours. But so we'll move pretty fast. But yeah, if there's anything, like, please stop me, ask a question. But yeah, let's get stuck in. So we're going to take this sketch. So this one's been scanned, and this one's been poorly photographed. So the lighting's off, the perspective is off. So I'll show you guys kind of the difference in between the two. And how that works. So this one's basically ready to go. So I can take this. I created a new file over here. It's an A4 file. And you can see as well, this is where the image size that I've worked at comes in. So this one's actually, it looks like it actually was a photograph because it has gone to 144, which is iPhone photo resolution. So this is 144 DPI, where my A4 here in Photoshop is a print, so it's 300 DPI. So we talked about this in the first session, where because I'm using Illustrator, because I'm using pixels, I need to concern myself with this. Whereas in Illustrator, you don't really need to worry about image size because it's infinitely scalable, whereas bitmap is not. So as you can see, where like on the screen, my image is actually quite large when I go full screen. When I bring it into my A4, it actually goes relatively small within that because it's half the resolution. So it will decrease that image down by half, which is potentially going to be an issue if I decide to use the actual sketch as is, which is, in this case, I know will not be the case.
Right. So you mean having parts of the sketch coming through in the final artwork?
Yeah, exactly. Like if I was to just go in and say, all right, cool, I'm happy with how this looks, put a multiply layer on top and literally just start painting away, and the drawing remains the same behind this, do this like insanely roughly, but the drawing is still visible, like the actual scan is still visible. That's an issue because I've had to stretch it up, and so I've lost resolution, right? Anytime I take an image that small and boost the size of it, Photoshop can't make more image for me, and so it kind of blurs and stretches that image a little bit. So that's going to be an issue. So when I scan this, or when I photograph it, which I probably shouldn't photograph it, I should probably scan it. But when I capture this analog image, I need to think already ahead and think, how large am I going to use this? And I need to scan accordingly. If and only if I want the actual finished drawing to be in the image. If it's just going to be used as a base, who cares? That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So this one's pretty easy to use as we go. So we're going to just take that and drag it into our image here. And I've just done that again, just like drag it into the tab, and then the tab activates, and then you just drop it back into the image, and then you've got your image ready to go. I will just make this a little bit bigger just for the sake of you guys seeing it. And you guys can see that it had started to blur this image a little bit, but all good. We do want this yellow, because this is in a Moleskine sketchbook, which, you know, you could question whether or not that's the smartest thing to do. I really like Moleskines, I like the yellow page. It is a bit of a pain in the butt, though, when I go into scan, because that means I need to change yellow to white, which is an extra step I need to do in Photoshop. But I can do that quite easily by playing with my levels. So Command L, and I can increase the value of the light colors until it kind of matches with my background, and then I've got white. I have lost some of the detail of my image doing that. But again, that's just always a balancing act. I've done that quite destructively as well, because I did it straight to the image. So I'm on my layer, Command L, and do it straight up. So that means that if I save, close, come back in, I can't undo this change. So working non-destructively is always the go. And we can do that by popping an adjustment layer on this, which is down here. And we're going to go to our levels, and the same window comes up, and then we can do this image in a non-active way and kind of increase that contrast so that we've got a nice clean white background. And that is now on adjustment layer that is non-destructive. So that's always a better way of working. And we kind of went through that in, I think, the second session.
Yeah.
So now this will allow me, again, if I was to use this image as is, I can then put images behind the drawing. So that's the principle of using a sketch as a basis. When you're using the actual drawing, you put the actual drawing layer on top, and you put that drawing layer on multiply in your blending modes. And that's going to make all the white completely see-through, which is going to, in turn, allow me to, with my paintbrush, come in and paint these guys without having to worry about sort of painting within the lines, because those lines will match up. You will see that because my black pen is not super black, as soon as I put the color into it, it does get a bit darker, which is always going to be the case. So again, that's up to you guys when you're drawing this. If you know you're going to use the final drawing as is in the sketch, in the final piece, you need to plan for that and do your drawing accordingly in a way that's going to be friendly for Photoshop to pick up like this. So don't do it with a light pen. Try and get it as black as you possibly can on white paper, just so that you've got less work to do when you do this. Right? If I didn't have that levels, if my paper was white and put that on multiply, you can see that it does change the color of my pink here, because it will mix with that, right? Because it's on multiply, the yellow will mix with this red color or this pink color, and it will give it that kind of tone. So it will change it a little bit, which is why when you use a sketch like this, you want to get the paper as close to digital white as you can. So that's kind of the gist of a lot of what we went through in session one. I just wanted to add another thing in here, which is a quick little trick in terms of if you don't have a scanner, which is completely possible, because scanners aren't exactly like, you can get some good ones for relatively low cost these days, but they, not everybody has one. So what happens if you have shot it? So I've shot it purposefully poorly in the shot, like the perspective is off, the lighting's not great. But one of the things that you can do here, like we can play with the levels and readjust the lighting as we just did before in an adjustment layer, but in order to fix the perspective, that's going to be a little bit trickier. So one of the tricks that you can do is when you shoot it, try and get the whole sketchbook in there as much as you possibly can. Because what we're then going to be able to do is we're going to transform this. So Command T is going to allow us to transform this image. And I'm going to use Command as a shortcut. Like if I drag this, it'll drag it proportionally. If I hold down Shift, it'll squash and stretch, but it's always going to be an equilateral like square or rectangle of vertical and horizontal lines. I want to boost the perspective here. So I'm going to hold down Option. You see the white arrow goes in, and that will allow me to line up the page of that sketchbook to the side of my actual canvas. And that just brings my whole page back in perspective. And obviously I've got a circle behind that, which is going to be handy for me because as you guys saw, like the sides are nice and clean and vertical, but it's really squashed my drawing and it's not great. So I need to then bring it back up to here and just make sure it's a circle in my image. And that's just going to fix the perspective of my really dodgy photograph that I took of it.
Yeah, cool. That's a good trick. Like using the points to re-even it and make sure it's a square. It's really great.
So Adobe partnered up with Moleskine a little while ago. Just on a side note, they made a sketchbook that has little kind of squares in the corners. I don't know if any of you guys.
I remember that. I remember that.
And that was so that you could then use the Adobe iPhone app and photograph this, and Adobe would fix the whole perspective for you using this information in here through the app, which was pretty awesome. But if you guys don't have that and you do want to do this, then this is just a quick little hack for it. Even better, if you really are concerned about like, oh, I'm not sure, have I screwed the perspective here? You could go in and just make a perfect circle and then fill that with a color, and then we're just going to drop the opacity and use that as a guide for your image here to make sure that you have, managed to get that looking pretty good, which in this case we kind of have. That's pretty solid, right? So now we've kind of got that, and all we need to fix is the lighting here, and that's, as I said, that's pretty easy.
And would that be with the levels and adjustment layers that you did before? Same sort
That
of
would
thing?
be with, go back down and make an adjustment layer with your levels, and then increase that to get kind of as close as possible. Again, the lighting in here is really, really, really dodgy, which, I've done that on purpose as kind of like a really bad way of doing it. But there are ways, but as you guys can see, like if I boost the whites up, the bottom left-hand corner is nice and clean. The top, where the light is coming from, is still kind of blue. It's got that tone. So I will need to boost that quite far in order to get the top to work. But as you guys can see, the more I do that, the more of my actual drawing I lose. So this pencil line in the middle here, because I laid down a pencil sketch and drew with pen over it, is really starting to go away the more I do that. So I am losing a lot of my drawing doing that, and the colors are getting all messed up as well. So there's always a little bit of compromise. The trick here is plan ahead and make sure that you have to do the least amount of work to the image when you go in. So obviously scanning helps. If you don't have a scanner, try and photograph it as straight as you can. But also try and photograph it in nice, clean, even, natural light as well. That's always going to be.
I always struggle with the like the lighting above. Like I always go over to take a photo of something, and then it's like my dumb head, and then like a rectangle, like over the white page. It's like always tricky, like trying to get the light right, particularly in like an apartment or a house or something. Do you find natural light is better than like natural light is better?
A million times better, for sure. 100%. It's just like, it's more even, it's cleaner. If you can get diffuse light, obviously you're not going to set up a whole photo studio just to do all this stuff, but I guess without sounding too mean, the lazier you are when you capture the image, the more you're going to have to make up for it later on in Photoshop, and potentially also not be able to make it up completely As you guys can see with my one here, that hasn't really worked. So I'm actually going to use this as just a base to do a digital sketch on top of. But that's the general gist of what we kind of went through in session one, as a really sort of sped up version.
Yeah.
So what I kind of want to do now, I guess, is to start inking up. Assuming I'm like happy with my drawing, which in this case I am. So I'm good to go here and just start painting on top. So what I might do is, I don't really need this to do anything. So I can actually be a little bit destructive here and save myself some clarity in my layers and just merge these two together. And that'll apply the effect, which will obviously then be destructive. But because I'm not going to see this image at the end of the illustration, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to select these two, and I'm going to Command E, which is a shortcut that I use all the time, and it'll smash these two layers together and put them on merge. Little tiny caveat, you'll notice that my illustration here is on multiply, so that if I paint with a color behind it, as we saw, that color will come through nice and clean behind it.
Yeah.
As soon as I merge these two together, that will switch back to a normal blending mode and my color will disappear. So all you need to do is go back and put that on multiply. So when you merge layers together, the blending modes, if you've got separate blending modes on each, they won't carry through in the merge. You just need to reapply it. Cool. So I'm going to drop the opacity of this, and I'm going to draw on top of it instead of using it as a base behind, because I'm redrawing this essentially. Brushes. So brushes, there's a whole bunch of different brushes in Photoshop standard. You can acquire more if you need to, and you do that by, I haven't done this in a while, brushes, you go to your brushes panel and you go to get more brushes. There we go. So that's in our window brushes. So that'll come up, and this is where all your brushes live. I'll be using Kyle's Manga Smoothie, which I got from here. So if you go to this little kind of almost burger menu, you go get more brushes, it will go online to Adobe's brush. And these are all Kyle T. Webster's things, and you can download those, and then you'll get an ABR file, I think, which is Adobe Brush, I think is what it stands for. Don't quote me on that. And then you just double click that and it will auto install into the actual app, and you'll find then your brush has gone into here, usually in a nice clean kind of folder like this. And that's how you kind of get more of your brushes if you want. I did cover how to create brushes. We don't really have time to get into that today. So if you do want to know how to make brushes and kind of play with the settings, that will be in session 1 of this 4-part series. So I'm using either one of these two. So either the pencil, which gives me this kind of like pencil-y rough line. This is cool for when I'm doing a digital sketch, when I haven't done an analog sketch. Otherwise, basically 90% of the rest of the time, I am using this one, which is a nice, clean, like smooth, very like sharp, tapered edge, kind of snappy line. And that's Kyle's Manga Smoothie, and it lives, I think, in his Mango Packet brushes.
Yeah, there's I might just mention as well, if you're one of those people that are super into getting like the latest brushes and everything like that, Kyle previewed all the brushes that are coming like very soon to Photoshop. I'll just throw a link in chat. He also created a brush that was specifically for the Black Lives Matter movement, and you can get it for free. I'll track it down and share it in chat, and you can get it for free, or you can donate as well, and all of the proceeds go to some of those fantastic charities out there. I'm not sure exactly which one, but it's pretty cool. Like, he specifically created a brush for it, and yeah, I've had to play around with it. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have a look. That's interesting brief, actually.
Yeah.
All right, so I will just a tiny little caveat with this one with Kyle's Manga Smoothie. I've noticed, I don't know if it's my Wacom. I have had a couple issues with my Wacom in the past, but where I kind of do this thing, I usually play with smoothing up here. And try and get that kind of line to be a little bit like too many coffees or not enough coffee, depending on who you are, to being a little bit smoother. So I usually play with smoothing up to sort of like 40 to 45%, and that gives me a much cleaner line to work with, and it cuts out that kind of like jitteriness that exists. But you guys might notice as well that it drops a little dot at the top. And I'm not a brush expert, so I'm not sure why as soon as you turn on smoothing, it does that, because if you turn it off, it won't do that. But the way you get rid of that, if you are keen to use this same brush, is you just go into your brush settings and untick build up. I'm not sure what that does exactly in terms of like behind the scenes, but it means that you can use smoothing and it won't do that little kind of dot at the beginning. So that's just like very, very specific advice for that actual brush.
Must be like the ink buildup, right? Like as if you were using
I
like
assume so, yeah. I assume it had something to do with like the nice, clean, tapered edge and like
Yeah.
this sense of building up in a nice way. But again, this is where it's just kind of like, a good brush is awesome, and the brushes that Kyle makes are fantastic. And there's a lot of kind of variety there for you to look at. But at the same time, there is also something kind of nice about, like, yes, the brush can do some of the lifting, but at the end of the day, you need to be the one that kind of controls it. If you're letting the brush do too much of the work, it's potentially going to play tricks on you, and you'll be maybe a little bit frustrated with the results that you are getting or not getting, depending on what you're after. And so in this sense, like, the build-up would probably help me get a nice clean tapered edge at the start, but that's something that I can control with my level of pressure and kind of go a little bit more zen and like encourage me to focus on my breathing a little bit and just get that nice clean kind of soft pressure like build up and release on either end of the stroke. So it's still kind of, yes, this program is awesome, but at the end of the day, you are still the one driving it, and you need to know how to drive the thing, and you need to know how to sort of create the stroke that you're after. And you'll see me do this a lot, like where I'll do the stroke and it didn't work out the first time, so I undo it and redo it. I spend a lot of my time doing this kind of stuff.
And what are
just
you
to get
looking
that.
for? Like exactly, like what makes you think, oh, it's not quite right? Is it like,
Okay.
yeah,
Great question. So it's things like this, right? Where like that is not a sharp line. We've got a kind of a dent here. It's a little bit kind of wobble. It's not a very clean, tight, kind of snappy line full of energy. So I look for this kind of like nice, smooth line. The other thing that I look for is a nice, smooth taper on the edge. So sometimes, like, you can see that it's not much, but it makes a difference. Where this kind of does that,
right, yeah,
right? That's not a clean edge. I look for this every time. That's my kind of like, I'm in heaven now. And it's like, it's one of the things that I get quite a lot when I'm doing this. Is one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is, why don't you use Illustrator to do this? Which is absolutely a good question. Like, why don't I use Illustrator to do this? Because Illustrator like lives to do this kind of super clean, snappy line. But one of the main reason is Illustrator always applies the same taper. It's that principle of what I was talking about before, which is the more you let the program do the work for you, the more chances there are that it's maybe going to do something that you don't want it to do. And what the catch is with Illustrator is you can set a tapered edge on a stroke. So your stroke can look like this, right? Your stroke profile can be nice and sharp and clean like this, so that every time your end or your beginning starts, you get this really clean tapered edge. But the problem with that I have personally is that sometimes I want my tapered edge to go from this to that. Long, like a much longer, kind of smoother taper. So for instance, on a stroke like this, I won't want it to do just that, where the taper begins from like here onwards, right? Where everything in here is the same thickness, if that makes sense. So I want this stroke to be a much longer taper and do something like that.
Right.
That's not really doable in Illustrator using that tapered edge brush. Yes, your tapers will be a lot cleaner and a lot smoother, and probably your line will have that built-in smoothness into it. But I've got that little bit of control taken away from me on that, and that's not the best thing ever. One of the things that you can fix up is what's called cutting back. So if you do have a taper that's not great, but you want to keep the line because the line works, you can just go back in with an eraser, put the eraser on smoothing, and just cut back into that and get that super nice, clean taper that you're looking for.
Right.
It is able to work because you need to draw and then erase. But again, it's all about that balance of control and result of what you're trying to do versus how well you can do it, and also how much fun for you it is to do. Like, this is one of the things that we speak about quite a lot. Like, I enjoy drawing in Photoshop more than I enjoy drawing in Illustrator. Yes, Illustrator will be more efficient for what I'm trying to do, but it'll be less enjoyable for me because I enjoy like working on that line and like that feeling of like nailing that line as well. Whether it's on the first go or the fifth go or the 50th go, sometimes doesn't matter. That I really enjoy getting that really clean line going in here, and that also means that I'll rotate my canvas a lot and trying to get that working for me.
Yeah,
so
cool.
this
Sorry, that was just
long part of it.
Are you going?
Yep, yeah, no, that's it.
I was just going to say a question. So Tugwitch is saying, correct me if I understand it right, the thickness of the strokes depends on the pen pressure, right? So you're using a Wacom, and so as you're pressing harder,
that's absolutely correct.
Expanding out, yeah.
Yeah, so this is me just kind of like touching, very, very lightly touching the board, the Wacom, and then I can build up as I go, pressing down harder, and then release again as I go. So that's to do this kind of stuff is crucial to have a tool that is pressure sensitive. Otherwise, you absolutely will not be able to do any of this stuff. And it will be possible for you to do this in Illustrator because the Illustrator will allow you, because it's built in, as I said, that taper is built in. But again, it depends on exactly what you're trying to do and how much control you want on the actual like quality of that line and where it tapers off and such.
Yeah. There was another thing as well. So Matthew was just saying it'd be cool if you could rotate your canvas in Illustrator, or can you do that? And yeah, you can rotate it.
I'm not sure. I don't think you can.
Really?
I'm pretty sure that you cannot, unless it's a new feature that they've brought in very recently. I'm not entirely certain that you can. If you can, I don't know how, and I would love to be able to do that.
Interesting.
So if somebody is out there and is more savvy with Illustrator than I am,
get Alex,
let us know.
Get Alex Lahores on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, but I believe that's correct. I believe you cannot rotate in Illustrator. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, it looks like you can't.
I assume it has something to do with the vector base of it rather than being pixels. But yeah. This is also my thing with Illustrator versus Photoshop is Photoshop is an actual drawing and painting program. Photoshop, Illustrator is not so much. It feels more like an image building program where you're creating shapes using things like the pen tool and so on. And don't get me wrong, like I use Illustrator quite a bit, and there are certain things that Illustrator is just like in a completely different league to Photoshop for certain things, and it's just like, oh my god, it's so much easier to do. but it is not really a painting program in the sense that you'll be laying down brush strokes and inking and doing all this kind of stuff. So there's always a little bit of give and take, and I do use both, but I do use Photoshop a lot more than I do Illustrator.
Yeah, the jury's out. Yeah, there's no way to rotate the canvas in Illustrator. I'm surprised. I just immediately thought that was. I just took it as a given. But yeah, no dice.
Yeah, it seems. I'm sure there's a good reason behind it. I'm sure that there's a thing of like, because if we did that, then this would break.
Yep.
But
your vectors would just fly off the canvas, like just infinitely. Tunk was asking, is it possible with a mouse? So I think some of these techniques, there are like a couple of techniques. Jezri, who has been on, who we both know. I remember this story. I'm jumping in a bit here, Jeremy, but I know that he started out with a trackpad. So he did most of his illustration on a trackpad before, until he could kind of build up his portfolio or get into it, or get enough work, or get the funds together to get a Wacom, whatever it was. And yeah, I think he mentioned on stream some time ago that he was using the cutback method that you showed there. So he would draw, he would draw the line and then cut back in. And as Jeremy was saying, it works to a degree, but it's going to take you a long time to get what you need done.
Yeah, it's not great because that's all fun and good if you're getting a nice, clean, solid color line. But if you are doing a digital sketch, first of all, sketching with a mouse is like brain surgery with a brick. It's not going to come out very well at all. But also, the pressure sensitive side of things doesn't just do the thickness of the stroke. It can also do the darkness of that stroke and how opaque that stroke is. So if you're doing like a pencil sketch and you want to get the same result as what a pencil does, when you press down lightly, which is you get a lighter line, pen pressure is going to be crucial for that, which I'm not using at the moment. But if I go into my brush here and turn on transfer here and turn that to pen pressure, you'll notice that not only is it thinner, but it's also lighter. And so it gets less opaque on either end. So you can do cutbacks when you're doing when you're working with a brush. You can't do opacity when you're working with a brush, or you could, but it would take you an insane amount of time.
Right.
So I might just jump ahead a little bit here. I started kind of working on a different version of this with a little bit more work done to it. And that is this one. Here we go. I can get rid of that. I shouldn't get rid of that.
I should mention while we're going as well, I haven't done this yet, but just if you are watching on YouTube, to jump over to behance.net/live if you want to join chat. So that's a chat we're monitoring, so feel free to jump over and say hello.
Cool. All right, so I might just finish this and then I'll move on to coloring. So I probably won't have time to ink this whole bad boy up simply because there's a lot of line work going on in here.
It's a lot.
But we'll just kind of take a look at how this could work in coloring. So basically the only thing that I would add to this now is time and just getting all that line work in. But now what I can do is I can stick a new layer behind this. And this is one of the reasons I like to work with this kind of relatively thick cartoony line, is it gives me a little bit of wiggle room for applying color. Now I've already laid out a bit of a color palette that I'm going to work with up here. And I'm just going to eyedrop that. So I for the eyedropper tool and then click on that. And then we're going to go in here. And there's a bunch of different ways I could do this. So I could either just literally start painting. And at this stage I can turn smoothing off because I already have my nice thick outlines here. So it doesn't matter if my line's all kind of horrible and wobbly because it's going to live behind my black outline, which is nice and clean and smooth. So I could do it this way and paint it in. The problem with painting is, well, I mean, it's enjoyable, but you're sometimes going to get these little things like this or little kind of like skerricks of paint that are going to miss out, like all this kind of stuff. I don't know if you guys can see those. There's just little imperfections here and there, down to kind of human error. So what I tend to do, and again, this is maybe a little bit contradictory to what I was talking about before, but just to kind of save time, I do enjoy the painting process of it, but it also does wear down my Wacom. So Wacoms have like a little nib on them as well. And if I'm kind of doing that, it does tend to get a little bit of wear and tear faster.
And there was a question on what pen are you using? So what pen are you using?
Physically or in Photoshop?
Physically, so I think, yeah.
Physically, I'm using the Wacom stylus on a Cintiq 13-inch, which this pen is standard for most of the sizes. I think it's the same pen regardless of the device size that you're using or model. In Photoshop, as I said, I'm just using Kyle's manga brush to do this. Cool. And so I'm just using the lasso tool here. So we looked at selections in the second part of this 4-part tutorial. So you can use this lasso tool, which literally just allows you to draw a selection. So I would normally just use this and literally just kind of go between the lines on my black outlines, which is why, again, like this thick black outline is nice and kind of is useful for me to use, because I can have this kind of jaggedy, horrible line and you will never see it because of my outline existing. Yeah. So if I turn that off, you can see that that's really horrible. But because I've got the outline on top, it masks it all up and it makes it nice and clean for me. So I generally use this, create my kind of selection, try and sort of do it relatively quickly. And then I use Option, Delete to fill with the foreground color, or if I switch that to like this color, Command Delete to fill with a background color. And so I usually keep my hand on those two keys so that I can just do that as I go and just start really kind of working a little bit more, kind of a bit faster for this. And then any imperfections I can come in with the eraser and fix up. Make sure that you are hitting Command Delete, not just delete. If you hit delete, you will obviously delete those pixels, and that ain't cool.
And we got 15 minutes until our Q&A break, everybody.
Sweet. So this is going to be useful for me also later on doing this work. Whoops. Because I will be able to use the work that I'm doing here will be reusable later on. So the defining of these shapes, me telling Photoshop like fill all these shapes with this, I will later on be able to use that to my advantage and create something a little bit more easily. So when I want to sort of start creating some shading, for instance, all I have to do to make a quick selection, and this is a good little tip for you guys, is click on the actual thumbnail and hold down Command. So Command, click, you'll see this little rectangle appear around my cursor. If you click with Command held down, it'll select everything in that layer. Every single non-transparent pixel will be selected. So that's a really quick and easy way for me to get that working out. So if I fill this base of the actual like petals of this flower, the time that I'm taking doing this is actually going to be reused and recycled in a bunch of different steps. And so it's kind of good to know that I don't have to redo this over and over again to get different kind of steps. As long as I do it once cleanly, I can reuse that work later on. Oops. So again, I'm only going to do what I've actually inked up so far, simply because it will take a long time to get this done otherwise. Also, I've got that fill, so I'm going to call this fill again, important to kind of label your layers as well, just for yourself, but also you might not be the only person using this file. Like you might have to hand this over to a printer or another designer, and they'll have to try and make sense of it. And if your layers are just layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, copy 4, or whatever, that's not going to be super helpful for them. Stick a new layer in here, and we'll just do the leaves as well real quick. So the leaves have just gone behind my flower. So as soon as I'm going in here, I don't have to be super careful because they will just live behind that. So the fill won't really matter too much, but obviously on the outside, I need to be a little bit cleaner.
Is this how far out you would, like, are you doing it faster kind of for our benefit today, or would you normally be more zoomed in and try to be really ultra careful here, or would you do it this way?
I'd probably be a little bit more zoomed in, and I'd probably be a bit slower on my line. Like I see, like here, I've made a little bit of a boo-boo. So again, yeah, like this happens even if I'm going a little bit slower. Little things will kind of go over, but I will tend to be a little bit slower and a little bit more careful doing this. So yes, is the answer to your question. I am going a little bit faster for everybody's benefit, and I hope you appreciate that sacrifice.
I appreciate it. Okay.
So we'll call that leafage because that makes sense. And there we go. All right. So now at this stage, I'm ready to kind of start adding some detail and playing around with this. So I want to do a little bit of a gradient inside these, like on the inside of these petals, just to differentiate the inside from the outside and give this a little bit more volume. Shading will be really helpful with that as well. But at the moment, because there's so much line work, it is getting a little bit kind of like, I can't really see what's going on. So clarity in an image is really important to have. And that contrast, not just in terms of color, but also in terms of shape, being able to distinguish what the shapes are and not just be this like, porridge of lines. So what I can do here is I can do a bunch of different things. I can either do an adjustment layer on top of this and play around with gradients, right? So I'll do that super quickly. We went through adjustment layers again in the second part. So I'm going to do a hue sat adjustment layer, make sure that it's targeted to the layer immediately underneath it. And we're going to change the color of that to like let's say like maybe like a green. Yeah, that'll do. Actually, no, green and pink will not blend well together. We'll go for a blue color.
Pretty cool. I like that.
And then, so that's obviously changed my entire image. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill that with black. So that mask is now hiding the effect completely. And I can come in with a gradient and bring in the gradients back into that in terms of an adjustment layer. So that, as I'm painting now with white, it reveals the color effect that I applied to begin with. So that's going to be an interesting way of doing it. Obviously, I'll need to make a selection on that because, as you guys saw, as I'm doing that, it obviously applies to the other things around it. So that's not the best result that I'm looking for. So I will then just do a selection. And again, I'm just trying to block that out because there's no information out here. If I go out here, it won't really matter. So now I can do my effect and it will only apply to that one leaf. So there is, this is going to take a little bit of work because I will have to make individual selections for each one. But, sometimes you just have to do the work. There's no real shortcut here that I can really do to apply this. I could do the same thing that I did before, which is create a new layer and go in with different color. And again, this is kind of like a green screen. So I'm just going to do this and go in and fill all of this stuff, right? Like create all of these different things in here. And fill that up. And I do every single one of them, and then I can make a selection for that, and then I would have that selection that can later on be applied to my gradient mask. All right, so I'll just do a third one for you guys, or a fourth and a fifth one as well, just so you guys can see what's going on here. It just allows me to use that information that I have identified with Photoshop to then allow me to create my gradient mask a little bit better. Sweet. So I've got those guys now done as well. So I can select all of this. I can hide that, the selection is still active, go to my layer mask and go to my gradient and start doing those things. But again, you'll see that it will affect the ones next to it. So I will have to tell it, like, don't select that one, but then I can deselect that one. So I can deselect that one. So for instance, if I wanted this one to be a little bit longer, right? So this one goes all the way up, but you can see that the one underneath it has been affected as well. All I need to do is go to my selection tool, hold down Option, and a little minus appears next to my thing, and I can just tell it, get rid of this selection over here, and it will deselect that, and probably this one as well. So again, it's still like, you still have to do a little bit of work to this in order to be able to isolate that one strand. But there are always ways that you can maybe potentially speed it up. If a client's kind of rushing you, or if they're just like, can you mock that up real quick? You can do it this way using this. And by the way, the gradient tool that I'm using is the radial gradient. This is very important. So up here, you've got a bunch of options in your gradient tool. You've got your standard gradient tool, so linear, and then you've got radial. If you use linear here, and you just try and do this, it will just do the whole thing because it will block out the entire image from your point of origin, whereas this only does it from that specific point. So radial gradient is your best friend when you're doing this kind of stuff. So that's one way to do it. It's good because it's non-destructive, and because I've applied that to a separate layer, I can turn it on or off. I can go back in, double click, and change the color of it if I want to as well. So if I'm not feeling that blue anymore, I can change it to like a yellow, which might be I would make it a bit darker. That's pretty cool, actually. I might just leave it there. So this is all non-destructive, yeah? But it will mean that I'll have to like keep making these selections and going on and on to get the result that I'm after for this. At this stage, I might just pop a different background color on this as well. And then I'll show you guys another different way to do what I just did. And then we can kind of move on. That color hasn't gone through super well because I've got that layer on top. So I could just put that on multiply if I want. And there we go. That's nice and clean. So I will spend a lot of time at this stage kind of messing around with what color works best here. How does it kind of more match up? The color theory behind this is always a little bit of kind of contrast. So you want to get a bunch of warmth. So I've got this pink and this kind of skin tone, and then I've got lots of blue. So you want this idea of like a lot of one side of the color wheel plus a little bit of highlight from the opposite side of the color wheel. And so if you look at a color wheel, you'll see that warm and cool colors, reds and blues, for instance, live on opposite sides of the color wheel. Or reds and greens. So you will want this kind of interesting contrast happening with your work in that way. Another way that we can create a similar effect is if I were on my leaf. So on my leaf, let's say that I want to get like this kind of gradient as well, so they get a little bit darker towards the tip, or even from the base. I could just make a new adjustment layer exactly how I've done with this one and do that, or exactly the same results and also non-destructive. If I hold down Option and kind of hover over the in-between kind of sandwich of that layer, and click. Oops, sorry, I need to make a new layer first, and then I can do that. This creates kind of a mask layer. I'm not sure actually what the technical term is for this layer. I used to just call it a slave layer because it's slave to whatever happens on this layer, and it can only work to that. I'm pretty sure that's not the actual term for it. So if anybody knows the actual term for it, I think it's a mask layer, but yeah, don't quote me on that. What that will do is this. It'll work in exactly the same way. So I'm on a separate layer. I've highlighted a different color. I'm going to go to my gradient, radial gradient, and I'm going to do this. So what that does is you guys can see is if you look at that, I can see the whole thing, but it's only applied to where it sees there is pixel information. Anywhere there's no pixels, anywhere it's transparent, it's not applying that effect. So in a sense, it's exactly the same thing that I have done on my previous layer before. So it's not painting anywhere outside of that blue layer. If I go back to my layer, you'll see that this will happen. If I click on the mask layer, that is what will happen. So again, completely different way of doing it, but doing the same thing. I can go onto this layer, Command U, and I can change the color of it if I need to. It's completely non-destructive, and it works in exactly the same way. So it really is just up to you how you want to work on this. They do exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. We're pretty close to Q&A, by the way, just letting you know, about a minute away.
Yep. I will probably just do another layer behind this, and I will just go into a nice circle here. So I'm using my circular or like elliptical selection tool, holding down Shift, create a perfect circle, and then I will fill that with, again, so this is where your color theory comes in. If I go with a pink, like pink and yellow is a good contrast, but now the flower doesn't really stand out. So there's not a huge amount of contrast in this image. Because the flower and the background are kind of the same color. So that's not really going to cut it for me. I might have to change the colors of that. If I go with the blue, then obviously the leaves don't stand out anymore. So I can go with a bit of a brighter color, but it can be a little bit tricky sometimes to find a color that matches up to the yellow, the pink, and the blue, and kind of creates that contrast as well. And sometimes I just get lazy and I just go with black. It's just one of those things that can happen sometimes. I usually tend to do this because at some point I will bring in some really kind of neon-y highlights, and those neon highlights will only work if the background is dark. So just like with everything else, neon, you need, neon signs don't come on during the day. They only come on at night because you wouldn't really see them during the day. So that's always going to be a thing. So I might do that right now, actually. I might just bring in a highlight of neon right now, and just pop that on a new layer and call it neon eyes, neon highlights, and pick a nice color that's going to work for that. So I'll usually go with this kind of like vivid electric blue, and then work to that. So what I can also do here is I could potentially make this another layer mask on that, so I don't have to contend with going out of that frame. But again, in the interest of kind of keeping my file a little bit lighter, and because I've got the black outline on top, I can just come in and cut into that using my smooth tool again, and start kind of bringing in the highlights. The trick here is obviously you want to pick a light source, right? For this one, let's say the light source is coming from down here. So what I might do as well is just create that light source. So pop a mask layer on that one, and stick it on there. Come in with my gradient and just make it as if there was light coming from there, and I can just drop the opacity of that a little bit.
Is that common to have like the light coming up from below rather than like coming in from either of the top
Not
sides?
really, but it
No?
just creates a bit more of a dramatic effect. I'm also the reason I've chosen that is because there's a little bit of kind of a trick going on here, and kind of I guess a little bit of experience is I'm trying to identify where I'm going to be able to kind of cut the most out of the light here, and where it's
Mm.
going to be the most kind of shape defining, right? So if I had a top light coming in here, um, what it's going to do is it's going to look quite strange, because again, you need to sort of think about how this light is going to hit stuff. So there's going to be light here. Okay, I'll do this very, very roughly, but there's going to be light hitting here, here, a little bit kind of here, but not on the bottom of these things. So we'll see a lot of light kind of doing all of this, but it's kind of just going to hit the top of these things. And that just looks a little bit kind of funky.
Right.
It's not great. It's not the most kind of, obviously I'm exaggerating this a little bit, like it wouldn't be this terrible, but that's the gist of the lighting that you're going to be left with at the end of this. And it's like, wow, what the hell is going on here? That's not great. And it's actually a little bit flattening. So this is one of the issues. Like if you know anything about photography, you'll know one of the things that you have to avoid doing is using flash, because it just tends to flatten everything with the same light. So doing that again on these leaves, like a lot of this leaf is going to be the same tone. So what I like to do is try and sort of identify a side of this that's going to get an interesting light. So for instance, I think I probably may have chosen the wrong color source here, because coming from here, this is going to happen on this side of it. And that's going to maybe kind of flatten that a little bit too much. What I'm looking for, basically, is to do, let me just delete that. What I'd really want is to get cutout lights. So just not too much happening, just on the edges there, just as a kind of a contour light or a rim light, just to kind of bring in that highlight and really kind of make that shape stand out from the background, and to bring that in. There may be some of them over here, for instance, that will be kind of in full light, but that's all right, because the majority of this will just be this kind of rim light that will happen, and it'll just mean that there's a nice sort of cutout effect to this, and it really allows me to boost the contrast and the depth in that image. And so that's usually the thing that I will base my light source on. From the bottom is a little bit uncommon, but it is a little bit more dramatic. Yeah. But it is also like I have to think about, like what's going to be a little bit easier for me to handle, and what's going to get me the best effect. So in this instance, I think probably what I did to begin with was maybe not the best way to go.
Yeah.
And so this is probably going to be a little bit better on this side, and then just drop that opacity down again, and I can go to my neon highlights and start kind of painting those in.
Oh, cool. Just before you do, I think it's time for Q&A.
Yep.
So are you going to you want to keep rolling while we
I'm happy
questions?
to, or I'm happy to focus on questions.
That's up to you. We'll see how we
Let's
go.
maybe take a break, actually.
All right, cool. It's important to take breaks, you guys. See how I was like forcing Jeremy to take a break there? I'm like, dude, take a break. The answer was clipping mask layer, by the way. So chat sorted us out with that. Clipping mask layer. So thank you very much. There's been a couple of great questions that I thought we'd hang on to. Actually, really early on, just about your website, because we were looking at your website before. Just asking, do you use a template for your website, or did you make it yourself? Just because I was saying it's really nice.
I used a template in Squarespace. I think it's called Flatiron. I think.
Yep. There we go.
Memory from 1875 when I first created my website.
Back in the day.
Yeah. But I have edited it a little bit, which is one of the cool things about Squarespace.
Yeah. And I love the layout of, like, if you're an illustrator or an artist, like the work speaking for yourself, it's like getting everything out of the way and just having big bits of work. You can see it. So a lot of people will look at it without actually probably even clicking in a lot of the time. They'll look at everything together and go, okay, this is this is who this artist or designer is?
So it's actually a really good question, and it's a bit of a tangent here, but we were talking about this with Jeremy Wartsman, who's the guy who runs Jackie Winter, who I believe you guys got on the show recently.
Yeah, we're doing like a Jackie Winter series every Thursday at the moment. Yeah, it's been great.
And so the font of knowledge with all things kind of illustration industry and all that kind of stuff. And what he was saying is, which I thought was really super interesting, is a lot of people will look at a website and like, as you said, like not click on any of the images. And like this kind of, oops, page isn't working. That's interesting. What's happening here? It's working for you guys, obviously.
It's working a second ago. We've DDoSed you.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to come back to that later on.
It's working for me, by the way.
Yeah, so kind of looking at that, and you know, a client will like to scroll through it like it's a mood board and not necessarily click and just look at the website in one shot and just go like, cool, I understand who you are and what you do and how to brief you. Without necessarily clicking on that. And as you was talking about, sort of one of the things that they've found is clients don't really click on the thumbnails to see the project inside. They just look at the thumbnails.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this idea of like having, like, not like back in the 90s when there was like a home page and it said like enter and there's a bunch of buttons and then you click on that and then you see the work. These days, that's terrible. Like, you don't want to like gate your work behind that kind of stuff. So this idea of having the page is just there you go and there's the work there and it's laid out in this kind of mood board, pin board kind of style is intentional. And it's one of the templates that allows you to do that because it just means your work is more visible more quickly for clients.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's super cool. So thanks for answering that. And Dana was asking a while ago, just when we were talking about kind of the canvas, I probably should have asked it while we're going, but what's the best canvas size for good quality illustrations?
So I usually go with an A2 just as a standard. So A2 is 420 wide,
420
by 594 high at 300 dpi. And that is your standard A2. So it's still A size, so it's A4, A5, A3, all those things. But it's basically two A3s put together. It's a good size to work with because it's a good print size. And if you go to the mills, you'll see that's what's kind of living there.
Yeah.
So it's a good relative size without necessarily bogging down your desktop or your computer with massive files that are going to go for. So you could go A1 if you wanted to, but I tend to create a few layers with a few kind of specifications on each layer masks and clipping masks and all this kind of stuff. So it can start to, you know, get your files up to almost a gig, and yeah, that chews up your hard drive. And it also makes Photoshop a little bit slower depending on your graphics card. So I think A2 is a good safe zone for me. But it would sometimes drop down to A3 as well, just if I know that I'm not necessarily going to want this to be a massive size.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Festus was asking, Jeremy, do you use Capture on your iPhone when you're wandering around and see a flower or something and want to capture the color or the shape of? Like, do you ever walk around?
I do not.
You don't do that?
I probably should. I don't, simply because the colors that I tend to use are a little bit more vivid than the real world allows for, and a little bit more electric. So there probably wouldn't be too much going on in like a photo of like a chrysanthemum like this or something in daylight that would really work for me. I have done that with sunsets in the past and just get this like super rad looking 80s kind of like pink and peach violet looking sunset. But yeah, most of the colors that I use tend to live in a dystopian cyberpunk future. And so, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then a question from me, because we're wrapping up this like beginner journey into illustration. So I hope there's some people that started from the very first episode and kind of came through and learn a lot as we're going. But what's the most common mistake you see people people make when they're trying to learn or practice illustration? Like, what's the thing that you see coming up all the time that you want to maybe give some people some advice on?
Illustration in general, or specific to Photoshop?
You could take it either way.
Okay. I think I'll answer both then. With illustration in general, as in kind of learning how to draw, or I suppose illustration is not necessarily learning how to draw. That's drawing and sketching. That's maybe a slightly different beast to what we're talking about here, is we kind of have to talk about this idea of style. And I think one of the big mistakes that I see illustrators do is trying to find a style, which means if you're trying to find a style, you will inevitably find a style that already exists, because that's the only way you're going to find something is if it's already out there. And on the flip side of that is, don't be too concerned about like, oh, somebody already does this, I can't do it because it's going to be too similar in the style. It's like, what you need to do, I think, is you need to find something that appeals to you, find a theme that appeals to you. And you're obviously going to find stuff out there that, you cling to and respond to, and sort of speaks to your aesthetic a little bit more than others. And that's totally fine. You can use that. But then try and sort of make it your own a little bit. It's like, I'm not the only person who does Japanese themes in their work. I'm far from the only person who works with manga themes. There are people out there who do that way, way better than I do. I'm also not the only person who does cyberpunk stuff. I'm also not the only person who does 80s stuff. But where it's kind of like fusion a little bit, like, every kind of Japanese restaurant has a tiny little bit of a different thing, unless it's your kind of, standard sushi train or something. But most places will have a bit of a fusion of like, we're going to do Japanese, but with only native Australian ingredients or whatever.
Right.
So it's a bit of a take on that. So rather than sort of go to a restaurant and be like, oh, this is who I want to be, that's not great. It's a good way to start, but you then at some point pretty soon are going to have to put your own twist on that. And so I think that's the clincher there, is try and find or grow a style rather than find a style if you want. And that means you're going to have to use elements that already exist, but bend them and blend them in ways that are going to be your own kind of thing. And your work may be similar to someone else's out there, and that's totally fine as long as you've kind of owned that. So that's kind of the answers for illustration. Cool. With Photoshop, I think the big mistake that a lot of people do is they look at all the menus and all the buttons and whistles and everything and just go like, oh my God, I have to learn all this stuff. No, you don't. You only need to know what you use Photoshop for. I know Photoshop for illustration. I don't have the first clue of how to use Photoshop for photography.
Right.
I know that it's possible and I know that it exists, but I don't know how to speak it. And so, you don't need to know the whole thing. And that is probably the thing that's going to scare you most when you start out and intimidate you and make you feel frustrated. So taking away that thought, that pressure, is potentially going to help you quite a bit.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you answered both, because that's really good advice for both. And I think Photoshop in particular, but I think that goes over to a couple of other programs as well, like After Effects. I think has that problem where it's just so intimidating because there's so much that you can do, that you feel like, oh well, I can't learn it because I don't know everything. I don't have the time to learn everything. But actually, you can get by just knowing, a corner of it or a particular area of it and what you need to know. Yeah,
absolutely.
Sweet. Cool. All right. Well, let's get back into the second half. Got about 40 minutes, I think. Had a bit of a longer first half, getting stuck into it. We're just bursting at the seams with content here.
Yeah,
that's what's happening. Thanks for the questions, guys. There were some really good questions in there.
Yeah, really awesome questions, actually.
And this series, I think, in particular, has had some really great questions from chat. So give yourselves a pat on the back.
Yeah.
For being awesome.
Have to address my non-working website after this.
It was working. Actually, it was working for everybody else, including me. So.
Okay.
Just had a little hiccup on your side, I think. I mean, the rule is if you're live streaming, it's going to break. So
Yep.
it's just always the way. It'll
If
work
it
in
can't
practice.
break, it will bend.
Yeah. Them's the rules.
Yeah, cool. So there you can start to see kind of like the kind of the highlights coming out of this. Shading is the spice of life. Shading and highlighting means that your image has contrast, it has depth, it has volume. It's the difference in between drawing a sphere and drawing a circle. Right? A sphere is a circle in 3D. A circle is just a flat, could be anything. As soon as you put shading on that, it automatically becomes a three-dimensional object. So really, you know, like if you're finding your images are a little bit flat or lacking kind of depth or clarity in terms of contrast and volume, and I don't mean contrast from like a color sense or a lighting sense, I mean contrast in a shape sense, as we were talking about before, then consider, you know, adding a sense of shading or lighting. You don't have to do it the way that I'm doing it, with this kind of very kind of sharp rim lighting kind of effect, which is very like neon-y, very kind of strong, sharp light. But you know, shading and volume changes everything about an image. It changes its dynamic, it changes its mood, it changes how you read it as well. And so it's really super important that, you know, you learn how to do this in a way that you like, but also in a way that's going to allow you to make your image a little bit clearer to read and understand. Because, you know, you read an image, when you look at the image, it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, and sometimes it can be really confusing because there's just too much going on, and nothing really stands out because everything stands out.
Yeah.
And that's generally when images become really sort of tricky to read and understand and make out. And that's not a great thing to have happen to your images. All right, cool. So I've got the lighting. I don't have any shading. The way that I will do shading is a funky one. I could do a whole range of different things here, and I could apply the shading in a bunch of different ways. But what I like to do is this. So I've got all this information, including my outline and all of my fills and everything else, right? And so what I'll do is I'll go on that, and that's call it everything. So I've grouped those layers together. You group layers, by the way, by selecting 2 or more and just hit Command G, and that will group them inside of one particular thing. It's really handy when you're trying to apply a sweeping change to the entire image. So 2 ways I could do this. With that now being this way, I can say I'm going to do an adjustment layer and do a hue sat. Stick that on the layer underneath, and what it does, because it's on an object, Photoshop is smart enough to understand that you're trying to do that to the group and everything in it. So we'll actually apply not just to the first layer in that group, but to every single layer in that group. And so this can be a really good way to create shading, because it's only applying to my plant without applying to the background, but it's then applying equally everywhere. And so what I can then do is I can come in and fill that mask, because every adjustment layer has a mask, and then start painting my shading back in. And the cool thing about this is, because I have blocked out the information on a mask, if I paint over here, there's no information over here, so there's no shading. So that's going to always be a really good way for me to do this and add shading in here. And if I screw up and do something like this, I just have to press X. So X switches between foreground and background, as you guys can see behind here. On a layer mask, that's always going to be black or white. So black will paint out and white will reveal. And then I can just really increase that sense of lighting on my flower here.
And you can just work super, like, really quickly. Like, you can be really confident because, you know, you
Yeah.
can just come back straight away really quickly with shortcuts and everything.
Exactly. And so what's really cool about this as well, beyond this idea that it is going to be really handy to apply shading to my image in a kind of a non-destructive, easy to come back on kind of way, is because this is on an adjustment layer. If I then decide, you know what, I don't want this color to be the way it is, I want to change it to a different color, because it's on top, doesn't matter what color I change this to, it will change the shading accordingly because it's on an adjustment layer on top of it. So it's kind of shading waiting to happen on whatever you decide to create on this. So that shading will change accordingly to the color. I don't have to repaint that shading a different color or redo it in any way, shape, or form. So it's really like a super fun thing to do in that sense. So that's one way to do it, just pop an adjustment layer on top. Another way to do it is, and I'll keep that because I'll show you guys a little trick in a sec. I'll make a duplicate of this, copy, and I will smash them all together. So Command E, when you've got a group selected, smashes all the layers inside that into one layer. And then I will lock the pixels on this layer. So this little kind of checkerboard up here says lock transparency. If you hover over it, lock transparent pixels. And that kind of does the same thing as a clipping mask. Again, Photoshop, more than one way to do the same thing. So if I untick that and do this, you'll see that obviously it paints my stroke. If I do, then it only applies where there's pixel information on that image. So it's another way to do the same thing. So what I will do is I'll select those pixels and then select a really dark color. That's going to be my shading. If you can, a little bit of color theory, always try and avoid just using black as is for shading. Black is the absence of light, complete absence of light. And so no shading ever in the real world is black. There's always a tone of something in there. If it's a sunset, then your shading is going to be this kind of like hot, very vivid kind of light. If it's a cool day, then your shadows might be a little bit more kind of blue. There's always like, try and sort of pick something, even if it's like down here, it's just a tiny little bit off black, but just black on its own is just, okay, it's a bit easy. Same with white. White light is never completely white. There's always a tone or a color to it. So we're going to just fill this. So that's filled everything in that layer. And then I will just put that on a lowered opacity. And then what I can do, because I've already done the work here on another mask, is I can literally just grab that mask and drop it onto my other one and it reapplies. So essentially it has done exactly the same thing, just in a completely different way. And that kind of cuts back to what I was talking about before, which is, you don't need to know the whole of Photoshop. And also, you don't really need to do, like, what I'm saying to do is kind of what works for me. But if you have a better way, or if you have, a way that you prefer doing that may be slower or take you less time, whatever, then do that. Whatever works for you is what you should kind of do when you're working in Photoshop like this, because it's, you're going to be spending a lot of time potentially working on it. So don't necessarily do only what other people tell you to do. If you've got a way that you like, do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it, if visually it creates the same exact results, who cares? All right. Half a flower. It's looking a little bit sad, but there's no way I could finish this in the time that we've got. What I want to do is show you actually also same kind of process happens here to create a drop shadow on this. So I can create a drop shadow with an effect on all of this, but I'll have to apply that effect to everything. So how you do that, for instance, if I wanted to apply drop shadow on this, I can double click on that. and that brings up the layer style panel, which we'll look at in a little sec as well to create a neon kind of glow with all of this. But I can also do a drop shadow. And a drop shadow, as you guys can see, if I increase the distance of that and the opacity and the size, you can see that it creates this drop shadow that will appear on that. So I could do it like that and apply it individually to each of my layers, but that's a lot of extra file information. How you do that, by the way, is you go and you press Option on the effects and you drag it onto another effect, and it applies exactly the same effect to that layer as well. So you can just keep doing that again and again and again, but obviously that's a lot of extra information. So what I tend to do is exactly the same thing that you guys just saw. I will make a duplicate of that, smash them all together, drag that underneath my layer here, lock the pixels, fill that with a color, and then Command-T and drag that down.
Right.
To
so you prefer doing it in a manual way?
Yeah. The thing is that with this is then I can obviously drop the opacity down, and that creates that kind of shadow effect. But I can also go to my filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and that will give my hang on. Oh, I've locked the pixels. Blur doesn't work if you lock the pixels, by the way. It's always a little thing that I forget. Gaussian blur, and there we go. So that just kind of gives it that kind of soft lighting that you want in a kind of a shadow. Obviously, think about where the shadow is going. If the light's coming from the left, the shadow will be on the right. And that just kind of gives it a little bit more. Probably blurred that a little bit too much, but yeah, you get the idea. So again, same exact way of doing it, just I find that a little bit cleaner, a little bit smoother. The one disadvantage to doing it this way is, for instance, if I've done that and I want to edit my image, I will have to redo that step, because if I add in another leaf, like here, for instance, if I bring in another leaf, that's not going to happen on my mask, on my shadow there. So I'll have to redo that. Whereas if I have done a filter here with a layer style here with a drop shadow on that, and let me just change the angle and the opacity back down. And so you can see that that's kind of done basically exactly the same thing. The advantage that this presents is if I do add in another leaf in here, because I've got that layer style, Photoshop will automatically add the shadow to it. So there's, this is better if you're going to make edits later on. But again, you're going to have to make it do that same effect to a whole bunch of different layers. So yeah, compromise is key here.
And how often do you save your work?
Not very often, apparently, because I haven't saved it yet.
Just,
but yeah,
chat was just getting a little bit of anxiety, and so I thought I'll let it hang for a little bit. That's for saying that my camera's off center. I'm a petty man. So yeah, we've actually it's been a bit of an ongoing thing actually with a lot of people, like not saving their work in Photoshop and doing a lot of layers, like you have been as well. So yeah.
Do you know what? I think because this is a demo piece, and because my mindset is not in the space where I'm doing this for real, as in this is going to be printed or this is for a client.
Right.
I'm not saving it as much. Not saying that I didn't just close Photoshop and not save and then delete all this forever. But if I was working for a client or a personal illustration, as in for real,
right,
I'd probably save a little bit more often. But yeah, that is often something that you will forget. Thankfully, I think Photoshop has a recovery system where if it crashes and you haven't saved, or your computer crashes and you haven't saved, it will give you a recovered file. And it does that pretty often, actually. The few times that has happened to me, I have almost lost no work. But that is always a bit of a wake-up call for okay, Jeremy, you need to save more often. What are you doing? Yeah.
Cool.
All right. What I'd like to show you guys now is just a quick little cool thing in terms of how to do a neon glow. I've done this a bunch of times on streams, but it's always a kind of a fun one to do. So I'll just make a new layer here. The easiest thing to do is to just pick a shape. So I usually go with a triangle because it's a nice 80s shape. So go to your polygon lasso tool. This is kind of entering into Adobe Illustrator land. Polygon tool, double click on your canvas, and I'm going to say number of sides 3. That'll create a triangle, and it creates a nice clean triangle. Then I can rotate this. This, by the way, is a vector object. This is a smart vector object. You can see that little identifier on the layer. So because it's done it this small, if I upscale this, it will not lose any resolution because it is a vector object. I will, however, we mentioned this before in the chat. Oh, you don't need to hold down Shift. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, so it is the same way. So it's always a little bit confusing because in Illustrator, if you don't hold down Shift, it warps, whereas in Photoshop, it does not. But I do want this to be a little bit more equal. So I'll just do that and pop that triangle behind it. And actually, maybe it's better if I do it like that. Yeah, that's better. And then I will go into that option here on my tool. There we go. And I will define the stroke for it. I'll make it blue, and I'll boost the size of it to something a little bit more meaty. And there we go. So now what I'll have to do is I'll have to rasterize this because I won't be able to apply an effect on it unless it's rasterized. So just make sure that you get the size of it down right first. That's everything is the right way before you do that, because you cannot unrasterize a layer. You
don't want to be stretching the pixels after the fact.
Exactly. So as long as this is a vector layer, I won't be doing any loss of resolution. As soon as I right-click rasterize layer, it now is just a basic pixel. So I will lose resolution if I stretch this. But if I don't, I won't be able to, or maybe I will. I can do. Look at that. I could do that. So yeah,
we all learn together.
Yeah.
It's such a funny thing about like teaching, like when you're trying to teach, when you teach stuff, you always discover so much more, like as you're going through the process.
Because I know that there's certain things that you can't do with type if you don't rasterize, but yeah, so I just assumed, but I was wrong to assume.
Well, sometimes these sorts of things can be like hidden in the updates as well, like this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I don't know too many people that go through all of the like changes and like quality of life things that we do, and sometimes there are things like that kind of sneak in a little bit, and then suddenly it's changed. So it is interesting to continue to poke around.
We'll put it down to that. This was changed yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday,
recent
you
update.
Had to rasterize.
You saw it here first.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Photoshop tricked me. All right, so double click on that. We're going to go into the layer style panel, and we're going to go to outer glow, and that's just going to give it that really cool neon glow. I have mine by default. Yours will be on normal, which will kind of look like this. I keep mine on the blending mode here. You guys will see. I will put that on linear dodge add, and it will just change that a little bit. It just means that if it's on darker colors or if it mixes with another neon, it looks a little bit more real. It works a little bit more like actual light. I don't want it to be that big, and I probably don't want it to be that opaque either, just something a little bit more subtle. And that's probably good enough. And then I'm going to put an inner glow inside of it. That's going to give it that really good neon kind of vibe to it. So I'm going to zoom in on here just so you guys can see what's happening, because it doesn't look like much has happened aside from a slightly lighter feeling. So I'm going to boost that all the way to get it really bright, so that's nice and clean and white. And then I'm going to up the size of it, which this is a little bit counterintuitive. So you'd think that the size being at 0 would feel a little bit less, but if you increase the size, it actually decreases the size of the effect inside. So it just means that the middle is white and the edges go back to that blue, which is what I want. And then I can decrease the opacity of that a little bit to like 90. I still want it to be quite bright, so it really kind of has that glow effect. And so that is your neon kind of panel glow. The cool thing about this is you can apply it to anything that you want. So if I select something like this and start painting and put, again, Option, drag, effect on that layer, I can now kind of paint with neon. And you can see that lighting effect now, as I've hovered over the yellow, it creates a little bit more light. So if I go back into this, all this is non-destructive, by the way. You can double click on it and it will reopen, and you can just turn it off if you don't want, or change the color of it. So if I go to normal, you'll see that that's not great. That blue on the yellow is actually darker than the yellow, so it loses that effect. So always linear dodge add just means that you get more of that kind of light effect when you go over some kind of lighter colors. But this is always really cool for, getting that kind of like neon effect that you're trying to get on a neon sign and make it super rad 80s. So I'll do that quite a bit.
There's something really satisfying about like how quickly you're like writing in neon and like using rather than doing the line work and then applying the neon to it. It's great seeing it in real time.
I do this when nobody's watching. I'll do the lightsaber sound when I'm writing that. I go like, because it really does feel like I'm a Jedi painting with Jedi powers. What was I going to do? So I've got this light source here. I'm just going to show you guys real quick how to apply a glow to that as well. There's going to be a little bit of a trick to this that we're going to have to kind of do a bit of MacGyver-y hack stuff to get this working the way we want. Because what I've done is obviously I've put this behind my outline layer, right? Because I want it to be nice and clean and sharp and stick behind that. So that needs to stay behind the outline layer. So if I double click on this and apply an outer glow, what you'll see is it's not necessarily doing the best thing possible, whereby it's really like only applying on the inside and it's only going far enough to catch the outside of it. So really what I'd want for that to happen is for this to be the case, right? To go in front of that so that glow goes on top of the black. But obviously I've painted it kind of sloppily, so that's not really giving me that effect. But I want that to happen on here to really make those neons kind of glow past that, to get it that really kind of vibrant, like even this light is kind of shining on this thing. So I'm going to go back behind this, and I'm going to do my little command select on my outlines. And then I'm going to go and select my neon layer, right? And I'm literally I could do a mask here, which would be non-destructive. But at this stage, again, you could be super safe and do all of that. But at this stage, I feel like it's not really going to save me that much work if I'm just destructive. So I'm just going to erase these, which is like, delete pixels, no. But it's fine. It'll be fine. So now what I've done is I've cut all of my neons that fit nice and cleanly within my black. So I can actually put my neon highlights back above my black. And because I've used the information from the outlines to erase the pixels that were overlapping, that is now nice and clean. And my neon highs can live above my black and really kind of get that nice glowy feeling that I'm looking for on that, as it's going on top of the black highlights, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You really get this kind of soft, almost like hazy kind of lighting on this kind of thing, which is always like a super satisfying thing to do at the very end of your piece, where it's like, yes, now it's all come together. That's super cool. I'm really pleased with that. And then I guess the last thing that I can show you guys is maybe I will actually show you guys something that I haven't done before on this. This is not so much of a recap as a kind of a new element here, because we kind of covered most of the things that we've spoken about in the stream so far. But what I might do is kind of show you a cool little thing that I like to do sometimes on this, which is a little bit destructive, but you get some really kind of awesome effects on this. So I'm going to duplicate all of this, and I'm going to smash it all back together again, and I'm going to hide this one. So I've got all of this stuff on the same layer, and I'm just going to do a little bit of glitching effect here on this. And so I'm going to take this and just start to make some rectangular selections in here and move them around. So a little bit of a shortcut here for moving, like making a selection on an image and not having to go back to your arrow and move it that way, is if you are in your selection tool and you hold down Command, it'll switch automatically to that tool. And I'm going to hold down Shift so it moves in that kind of clean way. And that's going to start to give me this kind of like pixely glitch effect that I'm kind of going for. So this is going to take a little bit of time to do all of this, and I'll probably have to do it to my background layer there. That's going to work in kind of the same way. But it's a really cool little thing if you like, again, if cyberpunk is the way of life for you, like it is for me. It's going to be really an awesome way for you to kind of get that kind of cool glitch effects going in here. That one I've just made on a new layer to get that kind of look and feel. And we can kind of select again. So it's making a selection here. Command J is going to duplicate that selection, and that allows me to just kind of copy it over a little bit and kind of get this kind of pixely look. Smash those two layers together and just keep kind of doing this a little bit until you get that that feeling going. Another way that we can kind of add to this is I'm going to duplicate this layer again, and I'm going to fill this layer with a nice kind of cyan, and I'm going to do another one with a pink. Or I could do kind of RGB here as well to get more of a kind of a screen look. In fact, I will do that instead. So this one's going to be a nice kind of vivid blue. And this one's going to be a red. And then we're going to do a green as well. Like that. Oops. There we go. So we've got these three layers that are kind of giving us the screen swatches. This is RGB versus CMYK. And by the way, I should also mention my image mode, always, color mode, is in RGB. If I switch this to CMYK, let me show you what happens. I'll duplicate, and I will move this into a CMYK mode. So CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, black. So it's going to flatten my image. Watch what happens. If I take this back into my original image, which is an RGB, that's interesting. It didn't work, obviously. Why not? CMYK. Okay. Probably because my actual image itself is in RGB as well. I did this demo before. Let me see if I can find the file again for you guys, because I did this.
Cool. Well, while you bring that up, I actually haven't brought up my schedule. So I'm just going to pop that over the top and just have a little quick chat about the week, because we have a full week this week. So Tuesday, here we are. We're finishing up with our series with Jeremy Lord. Tomorrow, we've got a new kind of style of segment, which is interactive drawing with Bill Hope, a little bit like probably more closer to the Carl T. Webster sort of session. So it's a little bit more freestyle, a little bit more interactive. Bill is a master at this, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So lots of chat participation, lots of drawing. It's all themed. It's going to be lots of fun. He's super excited about it, so which is going to make it really cool. On Thursday, we have illustration with Ken Taylor. Quite an illustration legend that I actually was introduced to by Jeremy Lord here. You know, he's introduced to his work rather. But that's going to be very exciting as well. And then on Friday, we've got design and layout with Campbell Milligan, who is from Monster Children. Very exciting kind of thing that's happening as well. And then we got Martina Martian coming back, and we're going to be doing some illustrations and adding those illustrations to Adobe Aero. So there's heaps on this week.
There's quite a bit.
Yeah, we're busy.
We're busy. Okay, cool. So here's that file that we looked at, I think, in session 2. The difference in between RGB and CMYK. So this image here is all CMYK, and you can see that the blue is super vivid and the pink is really vivid as well. And then this image here is CMYK. So that, you can see if I mask that out, you can see that happening now, where the color difference on the kimono, for instance, is not huge, but as soon as you look at the blues or the pinks down here, you really get this kind of like desaturated, kind of faded look. And that's because CMYK has a shorter range of colors than RGB. So in order to get those kind of neon looks, I always work in RGB. And that gives us a little bit more of that kind of like pop. If I worked in CMYK, it wouldn't really kind of get that same pop. So what I've done is I've then gone into my layers that I've made here, the duplicates, and I've done an R, a G, and a B. So a red, a green, and a blue, because those are the colors of a screen. And you can see that when I go into my blending modes here and I go to lighten, it creates this kind of like weird screen, kind of misregistered kind of glitch effect, which is what we want.
Looks cool.
And then we can just pop that underneath, and it kind of gets this nice kind of cool look that we want for that kind of glitch vibe. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. So let's wrap this up and start adding a little bit of a texture and some type to this, and that'll just kind of cover everything that we've done at this stage. So we're going to put a bit of a worn texture on this, and we looked at this in the third session, taking this image and popping it on top and getting a little bit of life come back into this, a little bit of texture coming into it. So again, just dropping that on here, making sure it's on top of everything else that we've got, and then sticking that on a multiplier layer. And it's just going to give it that kind of like cyberpunk grunge thing. I'll rotate that, make it a little bit bigger. I am stretching the pixels here, so we'll increase the size, but because I'm using this as a texture, if it's a little bit pixelated and a little bit blurry, it's not a big deal. I'll just drop the opacity on that down a little bit, just so that it just means that we're going to get a little bit more kind of natural vibe happening in here, less of that kind of perfect, super clean, crisp line, which again, I don't do this very often, but it's always kind of nice to know that you can do this. I don't really want it on the background too much, so I could potentially select my whole layer here and grab all of that, and I'm going to use that information to make a mask that will then apply onto this one. And then we can invert the mask. So the mask has gone everywhere onto my flower. So I could invert it and say, I only want you to go onto the background and not on the flower. Okay, so you can see in my mask up here that I've just done Command I, and that flips it from one to the other. And I kind of like that a little bit better, just so it goes on the background, but not on the actual leaf and the flower. So that's always kind of a nicer way to do this. And what I can do as well is I can use this texture as a texture mask on something. So let's say that I want a little kind of stamp down at the bottom here. So I'm just going to make a new layer. Call this stamp. I'm going to get a nice kind of reddish color and create a kind of a stamp down here. And then I'm going to use my eraser and cut some text out of this. So this is just the kanji for blossom.
Oh, you know it off by heart?
I do. I don't know all the kanji, but I do know a few, mostly the ones that I tend to use over and over again in my work. Yeah, so that's good enough. So just get that kind of, again, it's always about the Japanese vibe.
Yeah.
And just put that kind of down in the corner. But what I want to do is I want to give this a little bit more of a stamped feel because it is a little bit too clean. And so what I can do here is I can grab the paper texture that I created before, which is on this kind of thing, and I'm going to use this to generate a random selection. So first I probably need to, I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to duplicate this guy, get rid of the mask, put it on normal, and then squash that back down to a smaller size, just because we're going to get a bit more of a finer grain texture on this, and you guys can see what's going to happen. So I'm going to use one of the cool selection tools that I've got here, which is the magic wand, which is this guy. And this is going to allow me to make a selection, a random selection in here, because I want it to be random and I want it to be a little bit less kind of me having to actually paint the texture in there, which would be full control, but it would also take a very long time. I've set the tolerance up here to 2 because I don't want it to select too much. If you guys see what happens here is if I click on that, it hasn't selected very many pixels. It's only selected a few because it's very intolerant of who it includes in its group of pixel friends, if you will. If I boost that to like 10 and do a similar thing, and so I click somewhere else, it's still not really doing too much more. I think that only happens actually when I right-click and hit similar. That's going to select similar pixels to what I've done, and that's a lot more inclusive. If I drop that down if I deselect this and drop that back down to 2, you'll see that it's going to maybe, hopefully, it's selecting fewer pixels in there. You probably can't see that too much, but it's being a lot more choosy about which pixels and what colors it includes in there. So now I've got this random selection active. I can go on to my stamp layer. Thankfully, I've named it.
Clever.
I can move that selection over to the stamp layer as well, and then I can just make that into a mask. And that now I've applied this kind of like rough texture to my little mask down here. And that's always kind of a clean, easy way. It is a bit random, so you will have to potentially contend with whatever happens and whatever your selection was, and it really does depend on the photo that you've chosen and the selection and your tolerance. So there's a bit of trial and error that will happen here.
Yeah.
But it's one of those really cool things where you can really sort of get this cool kind of stamp effect happening on something that would otherwise look very clean and a little bit too kind of digital.
That's awesome. We are going to be cut off pretty soon if we don't say our goodbyes. So we are at time because it goes
just
quick.
As well because we are done.
We're done. Wow, it's amazing timing.
We're half done on a half.
Let's take a look at the final piece as we kind of thank everyone. So thanks chat. Some great questions today and also throughout the series. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know. Join our Discord if you want to chat and give us feedback. Always interested in what you enjoyed and what you want to see again. This is one of we've only done 2 series and I feel like they've gone really, really well. Hopefully you guys have learned some stuff, but yeah, we'd love your feedback. We have our Discord here. We'll also drop it in chat, and it's also at the bottom of every video now as well. So if you want to jump in there, jump in, say hello. If you're not don't use Discord a lot. Neither did I. So jump in there. We'll all learn it together. So we're still figuring it out, but it's great to see a whole bunch of our regular folks in there. Please hang out with us and give us some feedback, and we'll do some stuff together. But Jeremy, thank you so much. 4 sessions. It's like 8 hours of beginning illustration. Thank you so much. It's incredible.
No, man, it's a pleasure. Always super fun to do these things and go through the basics. I think it's always important. And yeah, hope you guys got something out of it and enjoyed it. And thanks for all the super awesome questions as well. Super fun.
Yeah, they've been excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow with Bill Hope. And thank you again, Jeremy. See you later.
See ya.